Hello, welcome to another episode of Gibbo's Corner. I'm Andrew Musgrove, joined as ever by John Gibson. It's been an interesting few weeks on and off the pitch, so we're here to bring you another hour or so of Newcastle United nostalgia. Got that word right? I was fearful I was going to pronounce it wrong. But we have delved into a lot of ideas, John, to see what the next episode would be. We've obviously covered Bob Moncur in the last episode, Willie McFall before that. Plenty of Newcastle legends we haven't covered, but we decided that we'd do something a little bit different. And I laid out the task for you to pick your best Newcastle United 11 with 3 substitutes made up of 2 players from each decade from the 1950s.
Correct.
So you've seen and covered most of those players. Obviously, 50s you were a fan,
but I've seen them all. I've seen all of them, yes.
So you were the perfect person to pick this team. And so I'll just relay the rules. It's 2 players from each decade from the 50s. So plenty of players to choose from. We'll start with the goalkeeper. You've picked Shay Given, but it was a close run thing.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing was only being able to have 2 from each decade, because it meant I had to fiddle with some people and put them into a second decade, etc. And a few obvious choices that I would love to have played, I can't because I've got too many players from an era. So it was excellent. On the goalkeeping situation, for example, one of Newcastle's great strengths when they won the Cup 3 times in 5 years in the early 50s was the 2 goalkeepers they had at that time, which was Jack Fairbrother in 51 and Ronnie Simpson in 52 and 55. And apart from watching him as a fan, Jackie Milburn became a very, very close mate of mine. We wrote a lot of books together, etc., etc. And he always said they were blessed with the keepers they had. And he went for Jack Fairbrother as the best goalkeeper he'd ever played with. And if you remember that he also played with England when they had Bert Williams and all the great keepers from that era, that was some platitude. And he was an amazing guy because he was mad as a box of frogs. There's no question, Big Jack, mad as a box of frogs. I got to know him very, very well afterwards as well when I was a journalist. And I used to see him when I went away with Gates and played at non-league grounds, and he was there. The funny thing about it, he was a complete joker as a guy. For example, Newcastle travelled everywhere in those days by train. From the central station, they had their luxury compartment on the back of a train just for them, and away they went. And they used to meet on the platform with all the players, and he used to turn his coat collar up and take his goalkeeper's hat out and pull a muffler around his neck and go begging to punters on the station platform, asking them penny governor for a cup of tea and all, and got great laughs with the team, and because they didn't know until he pulled the cap up that it was the fans, that it was Jack Fairbrother. Yet for all this lovable guy, socially, he was a perfectionist as a goalkeeper. The interesting thing in his days, he used to want to work on angles during training. And he used to stay behind after ordinary training and get Jackie to stay behind with him as a striker. An amazing way of doing it. He used to tie a rope around one of his goalposts and give the other end to Jackie Milburn and tell him to get away and get the ball and run in at an angle on goal. And he was able to work out, because of the rope, which angle the guy's coming in at and where he should stand to have the best chance of saving the shot. Now, very primitive, but that's the way training was. And then in days when there wasn't a lot put into tactics and the deep thinkers of today, that was revolutionary. And Jackie Milburn said, you know what? The fans didn't realise how good he was because every ball seemed to come into his chest from the save. But that's because of the angles he did with this rope, with Jackie, that he knew exactly where to stand and where the shot would come. And the guy had been a copper during the Second World War. And he used to go down to Market Street Police Station in Newcastle to get the white gloves that policemen used to wear. They used to be on point duty then, instead of having the the red, amber and green lights, you were on point duty, and they wore white gloves for the point duty. He used to go and get a pair, which he then wore during a match, because, you know, everybody's got these massive gloves now. Not in those days, they just didn't have gloves, or he wore the white policeman's gloves that was directing traffic. And if you notice some of the shots in the 51 Cup final, he's got a pair of white gloves on. That was his way of dealing with it. He was a wonderful keeper. Coming to the end of his career, he signed for Newcastle very late in life. He was coming to the end of his career, and he was out tragically after the 51 Cup final. And the next guy around was Ronnie Simpson, who was a totally different goalkeeper to Jack Fairbrother. Jack Fairbrother was methodical, worked all the angles, etc., etc. Simpson was more a reflex keeper. He was skinny like a spider. He saved as many shots with his feet as he did with his hands. Very, very lightweight. An incredible career when you think about it. Think of this. He started off by playing in the Scottish League for Queen's Park, aged 14 years and 304 days. When he made his debut in Scotland, he was a 14-year-old goalkeeper. And then he become the oldest debutant international goalkeeper when he made his Scotland debut at the age of 36 and 196 days. So he went from being 14 in the team to being 36 when he made his Scottish debut. And of course, long after he played for Newcastle, he won the European Cup as Celtic's goalkeeper. Fabulous, fabulous guy. I last saw him down here in early February 2004, looking absolutely magnificent. He came down, come across and said, "Gibbo, how are you?" Ronnie, I said, "Yeah, I remember you. You don't look much different from when I was watching you." And it was Bob Stoker's funeral, and he came down for Bob's funeral, looked absolutely immaculate, and 2 months later he was dead. And a big loss, as they all were. And while I rate Fairbrother and Simpson as good as most that's been around, for me there was one person that actually topped both of them, and that was Shay Given, who was absolutely exceptional. I've put him in the noughties, the 2000s, for my two from each decade. I mean, you've got to remember with Shay Given, he only fell 34 matches short of breaking the club's all-time appearance record, ironically held by another goalkeeper from the Edwardian era when they won the league all the time and appeared in every cup final virtually. And that was Jimmy Lawrence, who played 496 times for Newcastle. Unbelievable. Both sides of the First World War. And Shay Given played 462, which was quite exceptional. He was a shot stopper. He was more like Simpson than like Schmeichel. He was a shot stopper, wasn't tall, was a 6-footer, but not tall for a goalkeeper. And so on crosses, if it was a crowded penalty area, he had problems. But reflexes, his ability to save was second to none. Always known, and one of the nicest guys you could wish to meet. The nearly man, as Newcastle were at the time. They always got to semi-finals or finals of the cup, but ended up winning nothing. And he was never able to live down with Alan Shearer and all the lads that said he was the only Irishman, you know, that had no idea where Dublin was, which is when we played at Coventry, if you remember. Dion Dublin was standing behind him when he got the ball, picked it up, looked where to throw it out, dropped it at his feet to move it and kick it, and Dion Dublin just nipped round, took it off him and stuck the ball in the back, and then it was a goal against him. And so he became known as the only Irishman that doesn't know where Dublin is.
Obviously, played in Europe for Newcastle, like you mentioned there, finals as well.
Yep.
Not European finals, unfortunately, but one of the things I think does stand out about Shay Given was the latter years, and he would have happily stayed at Newcastle United for the rest of his career if they'd just shown a little bit of ambition, if he thought they were going to win something.
Yeah.
And I think for many that the final straw for him was probably, was it 6-0 against Liverpool?
Yeah.
And he was still man of the match. And there's a few comparisons, shall we say, to Carl Darlow and Martin Dubravka in that sense over the last couple of seasons, where they've had to pull off save after save after save, still lost by 2, 3, 4 goals, and that's still man of the match.
Yeah, I was at that game, and it was apparent. He was superb. He was absolutely superb. But you could tell as the game went on from his body language, he was getting more sick and more sick and more sick. And when you consider how long he's been here at that time, he just knew we weren't going to win something, and he thought, well, I'm going backwards. I've got to sort of get away and try to have a career somewhere else. There's absolutely no question that if he had been shown any encouragement, and I'm not talking about contracts, I'm talking about on the field of play, like there's an improvement coming, he would have stayed and seen out his time, and he would have beaten Jimmy Lawrence's record, and we would have had Shea Given as the longest server and Alan Shearer as the top goal scorer, and that would have been deserved. And by the way, just to mention, Dubrovnik and Darlow, who have done superb well and been on salaries this season, they should be so lucky as to be held when they retire in the same esteem as Shea Given. Perhaps they will, but they've got a long way to go before they've earned that.
462 appearances. And also, I think he's got the most European appearances as well for Newcastle.
Yep.
Like you say, what stood out was just his shot-stopping ability. I always remember there was one great save. I think Titus Bramble headed it toward his own goal. Shock.
Yeah, he sometimes did that, yeah.
And given that a change direction ever so quickly, and it was a superb save. You'll find it on YouTube and on the show reels that are on there. But he was, and the other thing as well, he had Steve Harper breathing down his neck as well. And,
yes, he did.
And Steve Harper, a very good goalkeeper. Shea Given, though, managed to keep him out of the side for the majority of those two battling, which says a lot about the standard that Shea Given was, because you did have someone as good as Harper knocking on the door consistently.
And somebody that deserves a mention when I was on about Fairbrother and Simpson there, that came along from that era and served Newcastle well, was Tim Krul as well, of course. And at one time they were all laid together, which was quite phenomenal. But Shea Given was good enough to have kept everybody out of the Newcastle side. And he had to be, because he was a reflex keeper. He wasn't a come for balls floated in the box keeper. But quite exceptional, and I think it was our privilege to see him play for the vast majority of his career here.
Definitely, and I guess just finally on Given, there's no higher sign of how high he's held in regard, when he is in Alan Shearer's kind of inner circle, as you say, every time they play golf and what have you still today, and when Shearer holds you in such high esteem, you've done something good for Newcastle United.
Oh, there's no question. Two of the greatest players we had, and as I said, it would have been very apt from my point of view if Given had held the appearance record of all time and Shearer's got the goal scoring record of all time. That would have been perfect. And I sometimes wonder if deep down inside Given thinks, if I'd stayed, I would have got that record, and that might have been something to retire with. And I'm sure from Shearer's point of view, when he come to Newcastle instead of to Man United, where he could have won a box load of medals, the one thing he was determined, and he won no medals here, the one thing he was determined to do was take the goal scoring record, so he could walk away and say, there you are, there's my place in history. That for me should have been Shea Given's place as well.
Was Shea Given the best thing Kenny Dalglish did for Newcastle United?
Well, he didn't do a lot of things for Newcastle United. he did a lot of things while he was here, where we got rid of the entertainers were beautifully dismantled. But yes, I think that it was. There's always got to be the exception. And for every time we talk about one of the entertainers being sold by Dalglish, he'll be able to say, but I give you Shea Given.
Well, on that, I guess as we get into the rest of your team, I imagine the two other signings that he's held for, that being Alberto Solano and Gary Speed, they probably came close to being chosen in your first 11.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I mean, they were three outstanding players, and my Jove, what would we give for those three today? Without a shadow of doubt. Nobby was a wonderful attacker, silky, and Gary Speed had everything apart from pace, and he didn't need pace because the pace was in his brain. but a wonderful header of the ball, a wonderful attitude to the game. Terrific. I mean, as a kid, he won the championship with Leeds United. This was a good player. But yes, in a minute you're going to get me to revise all my opinion into Kenny Dalglish and tell everybody what a wonderful
No, there's an episode there already covered, the Kenny Dalglish years, which is a brilliant episode, actually, one of my most favourite. You can head over to our podcast channels and find that. So that is Shea Given, and what era are we putting him in? The 2000s? 2000s, right, there we have it. On to the right back then, and you've picked...
Yeah, my two fullbacks, if I go with fullbacks, were the two fullbacks that you could never move from each other, which was Craig and Clark, David Craig, Frank Clark. And for consistency, very different players. David Craig would fit into any side now magnificently, because he was a silky smooth attacker at an age where fullbacks were literally that first and foremost. They were defenders, they weren't attackers, but he could come out with the ball and was wonderful ability. Frank Clark was the exact opposite. If he'd come out with the ball and went anywhere near the halfway line, never mind over the halfway line, to have a nosebleed, that wasn't his game. But no, he stayed on his feet. He very rarely tackled on the floor. He had huge ability to read the game and play the game well. And they were our fullback through the great Joe Harvey years of the 60s and the 70s. There were kids just coming in, establishing themselves in the team when the first Joe Harvey side was built. They won promotion and was second division champions in 65. By 69, they were absolutely established as the two fullbacks for the European Fairs Cup when they won it. And then there was the 74 FA Cup final side. And of course, after Joe left, there was the 76 League Cup final. Clark played in both of those, of course. David Craig would have played in both of those, but was injured. And if anything stopped David Craig's career from being as fulsome as it deserved to be, it was the fact that he was always bothered by hamstring injuries. He was plagued by hamstring injuries, which kept him out of the two Wembley finals, and was a great shame, because it robbed Newcastle and it also robbed Davy of many more games that he ought to have had. I mean, Newcastle with fullbacks haven't necessarily always been that well off. If you go back into the mists of time, which we aren't doing, there was people like Bill McCracken who changed the offside law. That's how good he was at doing his job at the beginning of the 20th century. And there was Frank Hudspeth, who was a left back from way back in the 20s when they won the Cup. More recent times to give consideration to was Alan Kennedy, who went on and achieved everything he achieved with Liverpool. Jose Enrique, who went to Liverpool in the same way as Kennedy did. And of course, Bez from the Entertainers, John Beresford from the Entertainers, who was, and has remained, a wonderful character. He joined us from Portsmouth, from Jim Smith, and he was due to go to Liverpool, and he was signing for Liverpool, and he went over to Liverpool to have his medical, and in the meantime, Kevin Keegan was saying to Terry Mack, this Bez, I fancy Beresford's a good player, and we would like him, etc. And he said, hey, but he's away over at Anfield. Went to Anfield, had a medical, and lo and behold, Liverpool come up with some knee problem that Bez didn't know existed. And Bez believes to this day that the manager was told the board's had second thoughts about signing this guy, he's going to fail the medical. And he did fail the medical, and he come out and he was decimated. I think KK heard the situation, got on the phone to Jim Smith and said, if anything happens with Bez, I'm interested. He said, he's at Liverpool. I know, but I'm interested. So all of a sudden, Jim Smith phones Bez when he's outside and said, how did it go? He said, I failed the medical, gaffer. Oh, he said, anyway, don't worry. He said, Newcastle want you. Kevin Keegan, get up there to St James's Park. And so Bez phoned KK and said, Gaffer, you do realise I've just failed a medical here at Liverpool and you want to sign me? And KK said to him, he said, listen, pal, he said, Paul Bracewell passed our medical and he only had one leg. So if he passed the medical, you'll dolly it. And if you remember, Bracewell had been cut off by Billy Whitehurst at St James's Park when he was with Everton, never played for England again. But and he got through his medical because they passed him fit, everything boy's knee. So if he finished his career at Newcastle with a knee injury, they didn't get any insurance, but as long as it wasn't an injury, they did. And Bez was laughing. He said, if Brace can pass a medical, you've got no problem. And up he come. But what he learned very quickly, Bez, is that you don't cut across KK. KK is the most likeable man in the world, but if you cross him, he's a bad enemy. And you might remember that we played Villa up here, and Ginola used to play in front of Bez. Now, I used to always say to Bez, I'm certain when you signed for Newcastle, you know, that you were 6'3" and that you only become 3'6" by playing behind Ginola, who, of course, never tracked back. I mean, it was beyond it. He stood on the line with a blow dryer doing his hair, waiting for Newcastle to get the ball and pass it back to him. So this particular day, the Villa had a very attacking right back who was flying down the wing. Ginola was perming his hair, waiting for the ball to come back to him, and never did. And Bez, when the ball went out of play, sort of said to Keegan, hey, am I supposed to stop this? This is like the Armada coming, like, you know, down our side. And he actually swore, and he admits he swore at KK, fatal. KK, there's only a quarter of an hour of the game gone. Suddenly, Bez says, I look out the corner of my eye, and Robbie Elliott's warming up down the track, and he thought, oh, no, Robbie Elliott. He said, and within a minute, my number's up, and I'm off. There's only 15 minutes gone, and he's sub because he'd opened his mouth to swear at KK. He said, I come off absolutely decimated. He said, I'm thinking the whole game about what happens. And he said, I said to Arthur Cox, who was the number 2. He said, Arthur, what do I do? What do I do? Because I've blown it with the gaffer. What do I do? And he said, I tell you what you do. You go into the manager's office now and you beg, preferably on your knees, and then you go home and pray that they get the prayer mat out, that he's going to forgive you. He said, I went and did that prayer, and he said, don't be silly. He said to Bez, get up, there's no need to grovel. You're perfectly all right. Don't worry about it. All forgotten, heat of the day. He said, and for the next 3 months, never spoke to me, never played me. He said, I learned my lesson from then on. Don't take on KK unless you want to finish second best. You
mentioned how Bez is a great character. I know he does. He hosts the match day dinners before the game up at St James's Park. I'm sure he will do post-lockdown. Comparison to Davy Craig, we spoke to him at a Fairs Cup dinner last year.
Yep.
And he was kind of like, why do you want to speak to me? He kind of, he's not embarrassed is the wrong word, but he doesn't, I don't think he quite understands, or he quite feels like he should be held in such high regard. Bearing in mind, you know, he was here from 1962 to 78, 412 appearances. He's in the top 10 list for the club's record appearance holders.
And he would have had a heck of a lot more, but for his
injuries. And yet, he's very humble, and he doesn't quite understand why, you know, people still talk about him and that team today. And I think it's quite something, because you do need to usually be a character like Bez or like Warren Barton, someone who can hold a room, someone who can handle what it means to play for Newcastle.
That's not David. And he's a one-club man, as you know. He's continued to, although he came to us from Ireland as a very young boy, he's continued to live here. He is embarrassed. He doesn't quite understand the fuss. He believes that there's so many other bigger players than him. And yet, by the way, you talk to anybody that played in the sides with David Craig, and they'll tell you how good David Craig was. There's absolutely no question about that. He doesn't want to do public appearances, not because he's snooty, but because He's not a talker. He's not certain what he wants to say. You can ask him a question, bless him, and he'll just say, you could say, well, how did you enjoy playing the first cup? Oh, it was terrific.
Very quiet.
And that's the end of that, yeah. Whereas if you can ask Clarkey or Monks, then you can go out and have a fag and come back and they'll still be telling you. He's a different character, but he was a wonderful, wonderful player, and he balanced well with Clark, because if there was a winger that was going to rip the backside out of Newcastle, Clarkey would take care of him defensively, and if we needed an out from the back, then that would be provided by Craig. And Craig and Clark are like fish and chips, ant and deck, Morecambe and Wise. They go together.
I mean, no bigger kind of achievement than getting signed by Cloughie, I guess, and winning the European Cup. Which
is what happened to Clarkey, yes.
Essentially told your career was over, and that's when you were too old for a new contract at Newcastle.
No question. I mean, Newcastle went through a situation at that time where they got rid in one fell swoop of Joe Harvey and Frank Clark. Well done them. Joe Harvey's still the most successful manager we've had in terms of trophies, and Frank Clark just went on and won the First Division Championship and the European Cup at Nottingham Forest when he was supposed to be finished. So I think both of them have had an answer out of that.
Into the central defence then, you've gone for Philip Albert and Bob Moncur.
Now, the first thing people would say with that is, how can I have Moncur to go with Craig and Clark when there's only two from an era because they played in the same teams? But I've cheated without cheating, and Craig and Clark are my 60s pairings, and Moncur I've got in the 70s because, of course, he played in the 70s and famously captained Newcastle United in the 1974 FA Cup final. So that's how I got him, and I've got Philip Albert from the 90s. This was an interesting situation where I was talking to you earlier, Andrew, about only two from a decade, because Albert would have been pushed very, very strongly indeed by Frank Brennan, and possibly missed out to Frank Brennan as the centre-half. But there's no way I couldn't play Milburn and Mitchell in the greatest ever Newcastle side. I mean, that's how we won the FA Cup 3 times in 5 years, and we haven't won domestic trophy since, by the way. But you cannot ignore them two in the whole history of Newcastle. So Big Frank, who was an absolute character, hard as nails. I mean, when Newcastle used to play a cricket match every summer against local cricket teams like Linz and Brighton and everyone, and Newcastle put out the side, and Frank Brennan used to play in that side. And one day he's running between the wickets, and the fielder throws the ball in towards the wicketkeeper to try to get him out. Doesn't throw it in correctly, and it's coming straight towards Frank, and he knocked it down with his head. Cricket ball, and he knocks it down with his head, bursts out laughing and carries on. And that he was known as the Rock of Gibraltar, hard as nails. Jackie Milburn told me when they turned up after they won the cup, they went on tour to South Africa, and they turned up at the airport with all sorts of luggage for the trip. He had a toothbrush in the top of his Newcastle United blazer pocket, and that was all he took with him, a toothbrush on the whole trip. He was presented halfway on the trip with a Zulu's big spear, and he carried that with him wherever he went throughout the trip in South Africa. He was an amazing, amazing character. And we've told the story many times, and there's no need to talk it here, but he went from being Newcastle United centre-half and winning the cup, the Rock of Gibraltar, a Scottish international, to going to North Shields non-league, and with respect to North Shields, and I have an awful lot of respect for them, I was with Gateshead as a non-league club, for a player to go from the top of the old First Division into non-league, not a smaller club in the league, was stupendous. And it was all because he had the audacity to open a sports shop in competition to the chairman and Mr. Newcastle United at the time, Stan Seymour.
Now, you mentioned there hard as nails. I mean, Philip Albert also wasn't afraid of a bit of a rumble. There's that famous picture with Janino in the game against Middlesbrough, which I think stands out. But he was a centre-back, but he could quite easily have played as your attacking midfielder, your centre midfielder, someone who could just drive forward, and he couldn't have hit a shot. Everyone remembers the Manchester United chip, but you had a goal against City, if I'm not mistaken. I think you scored 2 against City, and one was a long range effort where he just went forward, the seas parted, and he put it in the top corner. Better attacker than defender?
In some ways, I think he was. He was a modern-day centre-half, you know. He would be wonderful now, because now, if you look at Man City or you look at Liverpool, they like a centre-half who comes out from the back. One of the centre-halves, be it one of 2 or one of 3, who comes out from the back with the ball at his feet and sparks off. Albert could do that. The old type centre-halves from Frank Brennan to including Bob Moncur, I don't mean they couldn't pass a ball, but they weren't going to step out and play like a midfielder. Albert could do that. And I remember when Albert signed for Newcastle, I said to KK, what have you seen in him, Kev? Why did you take him? He said, Gibbo, he can defend, he can pass the ball, and he can score goals. I said, well, if he can do those 3 things, he's definitely worth having. And the way we got him was interesting, because we were playing in a pre-season tournament in Glasgow, and Terry Mack took a phone call on his mobile from an agent who said, I've got 5 days to sell Philip Albert, and I want to sell him into English club. Obviously, because his club in Belgium needed the money, etc., etc. And he'd just become hot property. And he said, I want to sell him into a club. Liverpool were interested, Blackburn were interested. Terry Mack went and saw KK and said, Gaffer, I've just had this phone call about Philip Albert. And as Terry Mack said to me, KK made up his mind about players immediately. He said he once went up to Scotland, KK and Terry Mack, to watch a player, and they're sitting in the stand, and this player ran out the tunnel, and KK said to him, Terry, away, let's go. He's not for us. And he said, wait a minute, this guy hadn't kicked the ball. He'd run out the tunnel and was kicking in the goals, waiting for the kickoff. He said, no. He says his body language, the way he runs, his balance is he's not for us, let's get away. And they went, and Terry Mack said afterwards, it turned out, this guy wasn't good enough to play for Newcastle. But he made his mind up that quickly, Terry Mack. He did it when he got rid of Cole. He was willing to get rid of him because he wanted Gillespie, and he knew he was going to go and try to get Ferdinand and eventually Shearer as well. Now, just that summer, ironically, KK had been over in America for the World Cup finals doing television work, and he'd watched Belgium. He did a couple of Belgium matches, and Albert was playing in the Belgium side, and he loved what he saw. Comfortable on the ball, come out, gracious, could give it, got his head up, saw players, played them in. He said, and he saw him there, and he said, he'll do for us. He's just right for us. 3 days later, KK and Terry Mack are standing at Leeds Bradford Airport waiting to meet Albert, who's flown in for talks to Newcastle. Now, the interesting thing, and it's how I got the story, and it's also how Newcastle got the player, was with Philip Albert was a Geordie called Peter Harrison, who I'd known when he played for Gateshead. Not when I was with Gateshead, before that, but I used to go across and watch Gateshead, and he was centre-half with Gateshead. And he got a move to Charleroi in Belgium. And he played centre-half in that team with Philip Albert. So it was Philip Albert and Peter Harrison were the 2 centre-halves. Albert then went on to a bigger club. But Harrison stayed there. And Harrison became an agent on the back of the work he did getting Albert to Newcastle. And he flew in with Albert to talk. And KK said, the minute I said to Philip Albert, who's your mate? And he says, Peter Harrison. This is a guy, he played centre-half with me, Charleroi. He used to play for Gateshead, and he's a Geordie, and he's a Newcastle United fan. KK said, that'll do for me. I've got him straight away. And sure enough, he had. And, of course, I got the phone call because I knew Peter, and they got the signing, and I got the story. So it worked out for everybody. But Monk's, we've just done a Monk stories. We've done every Monk story as possible. But his ability to organise, his leadership, his ability to organise was second to none. And amazingly, for a sweeper, he scored cup final goals.
How do you think Albert would cope in that back line, though? Because he was used to being in a back line where technically there was only one defender, and that was often Darren Peacock. The rest of them would just go up at will. It's quite a defensive back four, some would argue. Would he be? I mean, he'd clearly be the most attacking.
Back four is supposed to be able to defend. That's supposed to be their first job. That is these days is not so much the way it is anymore. But Philip Albert, when he's such a strong-willed guy, he wouldn't care what the rest of it. He'll do his game. And the rest will either fit in or not fit in. And the fact that he would have some freedom to go on upfield. If Newcastle didn't win the Premier League title with the entertainers, perhaps it was because the whole of the back four, there was only Darren Peacock that actually thought about defending at all in the back four. And that might have just been how Newcastle didn't win the title. Moncur and Clark would have looked after the back, and Philip Albert would have been able to get on his bike that much more often. And certainly, if they were playing today, and I'm picking a side they would play today if they were all in the pump, then his ability to come out of the back would be invaluable to that side.
On to the midfield then. We'll start with the wingers, and you've gone for Bobby Mitchell and Chris Waddle.
Yes, yeah. Trickery, ability, second to none, really, in both of them. Waddle... Mitchell, I said, just had to be in the side. Bobby Mitchell, Bobby Dazzler, left peg. He was our Stanley Matthews, who was the greatest player of the day, knighted, probably the first footballer, I think, to be knighted. And Mitch was our Stanley Matthews. He made the goals for Jackie Milburn. He scored a lot himself. He ran the 55 cup final, Schooler balls from right to left, Schooler to Mitchell, ripped the heart out of Man City. He's untouchable and is one of my 50s. Yes, there's somebody like Ginola that you would consider for that position without a shadow of doubt. Chris Waddle, amazing, because he went from being an ugly duckling to a swan, all within his time in Newcastle. When he first come to Newcastle, having played at Towlow and non-league, he looked as if he was carrying a bag of coal on his back. His shoulders were drooping, he was stooped, he had the lot. By the time he left to go to Spurs and Marseille, and he was upright, he was elegant, he was an England international. Always remember with the Waddle, one of the interesting things I found in a long life in football is when you meet players before they're players. I mean, before they're stars. And I used to get invited to go and do a lot of presentations to junior football sides, etc., in the old days. And sure enough, I went along to Clark Chapman's, which was a works side, with John Connolly, the old Newcastle winger, the Scottish boy who played for Newcastle, to do a presentation to Clark Chapman's. One of the mill, presented, each player come up, got their award, moved on, got a group photograph with us two in the group photograph, job done, talk to the kids, talk to the officials, leave. Probably down nightclub just to be sociable with, keep company. But that was the night. Years later, when I'm talking to Waddler, he produces this photograph, and it's the photograph from Clark Chapman's. He said, "Can you remember when?" I said, "Oh, I can't." He said, "Well, look at him." And there was a kid sitting in the front row, almost apologising for being alive. The look on his face, and it was the Waddler who had presented the trophy to him when he was nobody. I did that years later with Paul Gascoigne, famously, who was with Red Youth Boys Club, and he showed me the photo later and said, "There you are, that was me." And that was him, because that's the summer he had. That's the start he had. I mean, he played for Clark Chapman's, he played for Towlow when we got him. He was a sausage seasoner. Try saying that quickly on a bad day. That was his job. Because he wasn't a full... It's amazing to think Waddle and Beardsley, sausage season, and Beardsley was a labourer in a local factory. Look at the quality of those two boys, and clubs didn't want them. when they were kids.
Foundation of what was a very good England side later on as well.
Totally. I mean, Waddle and Beardsley, I went to Paris with both of them for Hennessy Cognac North East Player of the Year on separate years, and Beardsley won it and Waddle won it. And my job was to go over to there and do the stories. 3 days. We used to go to the Lido, meals on the Champs-Elysees. It was an awful job, but somebody had to do it, and I volunteered. But that was the quality of people like Waddle and Beardsley, who are both in my side. And he just got better. He used to, when he first played in the Newcastle first team, with people like McGarry there, etc., he used to tell me, he used to go down to Marlborough bus station after the game and get on the bus to go home down past Felon, down the Tyne, to go home, and he used to be that nervous that he'd be recognised on. He used to buy a pink on the way down from St James's Park, the football pink for young lads like you who probably didn't see.
I know what the pink is, don't worry about that, John.
I think you got fish and chips in one some night, didn't you? But the pink was a wonderful, wonderful paper. He used to get the pink and sit upstairs in the bus and open it up right across his face so nobody could see who he was, and sort of reading it. He says, and I could hear voices saying, that Waddle's a canny player. Aye, but he's too lightweight. He's scared of his own shadow. And he said, and I was sitting there and I had no idea. I mean, can you imagine these days? I mean, now it's a Porsche at the door and somebody brings it to the main entrance of St James's Park for you to jump in and roar off home. It was the bus along Felon High Street in those days. But he become the most wonderful player, and at the other end of the spectrum, I told you what it was like when I went to Clark Chapman's. At the other end of the spectrum, when he was in his 40s, I then owned Gateshead, and we went down to Worksop to play Worksop in the conference. And Waddle was playing on the wing, and I saw him before the game, and I said, listen, you, if you do anything today to hurt my team, I'll be coming looking for you, your reputation will not be worth having. Laughing. He stood out on the wing. It was soaking wet. It was the middle of the week, absolutely lashing down, under lights. He stood out on the right wing, and for 80 minutes, did absolutely nothing. Had his sleeves, his hands up his sleeves, the collar turned up, standing on the wing. For 10 minutes, they got the ball out to him, and he ripped the backside out of us. They scored 3 goals in that time. We lost. I went in the bar after the game, and our left back, who shall remain nameless, is standing, talking to the Waddler, saying what a privilege it was to play against him, and could he have his autograph? And when I got on the bus, I said to the left back, come up here, son, just sit there. If you ever do that again, don't bother coming on the bus, just go straight home because you'll never play for us again. You're not supposed to be grateful for however good this right winger is for ripping the backside out of you, but that's the ability he had, and at 40-odd, for 10 minutes, I saw Bobby Mitchell do exactly the same when I was a Cub reporter covering Gateshead. Gateshead were non-league, played Dalton, who were in the league. Mitchell played for 10 minutes, ripped the backside out of Dalton, not Dalton, we won 4-1. To keep that ability, it's just you can't do it for 90, but you can still do it.
A few other names that might have made it onto the wings. I mean, you got Terry Hibbert, who's obviously one of the names that stand out.
There's no question. I mean, there was a pile. If you look, certainly Terry Hibbert would have got into most sides. And no doubt Supermac will have something to say to me about Hibby not being in the side because of his contribution to Supermac. But then Supermac isn't in the side.
Have you told him that yet? No,
I thought best not. But the two I have picked, it would be very difficult to argue against them. Ginola could well be in that side. I mean, what a wonderful player he was. We only had him fleetingly, but I remember about his second or third game played Middlesbrough and they doubled up on him. They played 2 left backs, one on him and one behind him for when he come out the first one, and he'd come out both of them And they didn't know which way he'd gone or where he was going or what was happening. And he was elegant and a scorer, wonderful, wonderful goals. I got very lucky with Ginola because I'd helped John Hall get in at St James's Park, and in return for that, he said, as my main sponsor, that Newcastle United would come across and play Gateshead in the pre-season friendly at the International Stadium. And they played all their friendlies away from home in those days, so this was going to be their only appearance on St James's Park. And Kevin Keegan come out and announced in the week building up to the game, because normally reserve sides were sent to places like Gateshead, that the whole first team would play at Gateshead. Within 12 hours, we sold out the whole stadium at 11,950 with Newcastle tickets, because it was the Tyneside debut for Newcastle's two new signings, which just happened to be Ginola and Les Ferdinand. And it was wonderful. Just a quick story, I remember saying to our, look, this is your wages paid for the season, the gate money tonight. So they can score as many as they like if they want to, because difference in class is ginormous. Whatever you do, don't injure any of the players, because what I need, like a hole in all, is a Newcastle player out for 6 weeks with an injury because you're reckless. Told them. Within quarter of an hour, Mark Hine, our midfielder, took Ginola off above the stocking tops, and I learned for the first time what Gaelic football is really all about, because I couldn't have walked as far as he rolled. He rolled about 15 times. All that hair went all over the place, and I thought he was going to be taken home in a body bag. Everyone turned round, looked at me. I was straight down to the manager saying, get Hine told, get him off, when having no more tackles like that. He was fine. He played on. And you just look at a player like that and say, how on earth? Because he left the French side in very difficult circumstances when he lost the ball and gave it away, and they went down and scored. I think that's why he never bothered doing any defensive work in the future, and Bez become 3'6" defend behind him. But he was a wonderful, wonderful talent, or privilege to have. Got very upset because Barcelona come in from Newcastle. Kevin Keegan conned him into stay and said, stay with us, we'll win the league. We're very close to it. Stay, don't go. Right, Gaffer, he said. And by the next, halfway through the next season, KK had taken to his toes and walked out, and it was too late for Ginola to get to Barcelona. So he was very disgruntled about that. Wonderful player, but I've got to go Waddle and Mitchell.
So into the middle of the park, and you've gone for Peter Beardsley and Gaza. Slightly twisted the decades again, but that's within the rules permitted. Let's start with Gaza then. A youngster who didn't exactly, it wasn't the easiest route to the first team. Obviously, Jack Charlton give him a few harsh words, and that seemed to buck his ideas up. And then he did explode, and he was this marvellous player with the ball at his feet. We've just lost arguably the best player of the 20th century, and that is obviously Diego Maradona. But Gaza was, kind of in that bracket where the ball at the feet, absolutely
quite
magical
wonderful.
to watch.
Jack John's input into the making of Gaza was getting him into the office and saying, if I see you eating a Mars bar again, because that's what Gaza did, he ate Mars bars all day long. He said, if I see you eating a Mars bar again, you out this club, your feet won't touch. Now, the big thing about Big Jack was he was called Big Jack because he was like a giraffe. And also he had a voice that could cut you in half, and nobody was going to offend Big Jack. And he started to lose that puppy fat that he had, Gaza, and he sort of blossomed into this quite wonderful, wonderful talent. To think that at that age, where you had Waddle, Beardsley and Gascoigne, all of whom are in my greatest ever side, we had them, 3 Geordies, all getting picked regularly for England. And what did we do? Appreciate them. Well, no, we didn't appreciate them. We sold them.
That was going to be my question.
We sold them.
The frustration that Newcastle didn't build on that.
If you're going to sell, if you can't keep Geordies and build a team around Geordies, you've got no chance, mate. Because you might sell a foreigner who's got no particular allegiance to this area, you might sell somebody from the south who might want to return south. But if you sell 3 Geordies born and bred up here, come through the youth system, done everything at this club, and they want to leave, and be fair, they wanted to leave because they saw there was no ambition within the club, and they were better than that. They wanted to leave. All we could see was pound notes. We took pound notes. What happened? We were relegated.
Did you ever have a little word with the owners and say, what are you doing here? Just show that bit of ambition.
Oh, without a shadow of doubt. Without a shadow of doubt. The managers concerned, Willie McFall and Jack John, could hide behind justifiably. We can't do anything about it. If the board accept money, we can't keep them. I can't totally accept that because there's got to be some ambition that is not shown perhaps on the training ground or in team selection or the players we buy for these 3 players to want to leave. I mean, Beardsley couldn't come back quick enough when the entertainers were being formed, etc., because he could, albeit it was later in his career, but he could see what Newcastle were trying to do in those days. In these days, you couldn't see what Newcastle were trying to do.
I guess the frustration's even higher as well, considering what had gone before Keegan and everything that had come then. And then the way they spent the money, especially towards the end of the decade when they spent it on the likes of Dave Besson and I think John Henry came in. And it was just not necessarily
Andy
bad
Thorne,
players, but it just wasn't spent wisely.
No, not at all. Not at all. But you knew, didn't you? It's like fans these days, they see a pattern. They know what's happening. You know, if you sell within 18 months 3 players of the quality we are talking about, who had all won England caps and were going to get so much better. This was them at the start of their sublime careers. And you sell them, you deserve to go down. Not only do you deserve to, but you're going to. It's inevitable. And I mean, Gascoigne was like a breath of fresh air. He was the last one to be sold. He was younger than Waddle or Beardsley. He was like a breath of fresh air. It was Bobby Robson, who later became manager of Newcastle, who called him daft as a bush when he was in the England side, Gaza with him. And we used to do a lot of talk-ins around the area. He was a kid, he was a teenager, capable of doing talk-ins and running the show on stage. I mean, you didn't know what he was going to do next. He was infectious. The crowd loved him. He saw, we were up in Ponteland in the social club. He saw a piano standing, an organ standing in the corner. Suddenly walks across, flips a lid up and starts playing Great Balls of Fire, etc. in the middle of the talking. People warmed to him because he was just a class guy.
He just loved playing football as well. He was that was what it was at heart. He just loved the ball at his feet and just playing football.
Yeah. I mean, you know, you had that famous occasion. Remember the very famous photograph of Vinnie Jones grabbing him by the unmentionables when we played down at Wimbledon, and it was Vinnie Jones' way of putting the fear of God, because they knew they had to stop Gascoigne, and they couldn't stop him through legitimate means because he was a better player than all their team put together, so they stopped him in the only way they could. I mean, Vinnie Jones was saying to him when he went to take a throw in, "Don't go away, son, I'll be back in 5 seconds." And all he did was stand on Gaza's toes the whole game. And at the end of the game, this very famous photograph that won the snap of the year was a wonderful thing, because Gaza being Gaza sent Vinnie Jones one red rose with a little message attached to it saying, "I didn't know you loved me as much as you did, darling." And they become very close friends and we used to go fishing together, etc., etc.
Just finally on Gaza, do you think he made the right move going to Spurs? Obviously Manchester United were in, and people always have that debate. Had he gone to Sir Alex, it would have gone a lot better. His career would have reached the heights many expected it to.
I think that there's an awful lot to be said by that. Ferguson handled Giggs magnificently. Giggs could have become the next George Best, and I'm not talking on the field because that's who he was compared to on the field, but off the field he could have become the next George Best. And it was Ferguson had made certain that didn't happen. Also, Manchester's a better city than London if you're at all wayward. And Gaza was wayward. He just loved the high life. In fairness to him, Venables was a wonderful manager for him, because Venables adored quality players. He loved to attack. He was a magnificent tactician. He was possibly overkind to him in the way that Matt Busby was overkind to George Best, where you needed a bit more of the discipline Ferguson would have come out with. Yes, I think it might have benefited him to go to Man U, but he went to Spurs, got a very, very bad injury, as we know, in semi-final of the Cup. He was already going to Lazio, and I went out and stayed with him in Lazio, in Rome, when he was playing for Lazio for 3 days that turned into 5 days and seemed like 10 days. And had a wonderful time with him. He drove his Harley Davidson. He was into big Harley Davidson bikes. And he drove them to training every day. And even Lazio by now knew he was a few slates short of a full roof. And they said, you can't drive your Harley Davidson, it's far too dangerous. You're recovering from very bad injury. He said, that's okay, I won't drive it. Gets on it, puts a German World War II tin hat on, drives his bike, arming a 4x4 behind him with his dad, drive all the way through the traffic in Rome, park up at a garage, sticks his bike, puts his tin hat on the bike, jumps in the back of our car, goes round the corner, trains, does the same on the way home. On the way home, through all the traffic, gets down to his house, he's got electronic gates, presses them on his Harley Davidson to open, flies up the drive, drives straight through the French doors, which he's left open, parks a Harley Davidson on a sheepskin rug in front of the fire, and switches DVD of Elvis Presley on, sits in the armchair watching Elvis Presley with his World War II German tin hat on. That was Gaza, and he didn't think anything was any different. He was as daft as a bush. But I mean, this was the guy, bless him, if you remember, Raoul Moat, when he turned up at the Raoul Moat thing with half a chicken, a few cans and a fishing rod, because we'll be able to fish, and I knew him when he was on the doors. Daft as a bush, but the heart of the size of a frying pan, and he would look after everybody financially. He really would.
With any whispers of him coming back during the mid-90s, obviously he went to Lazio, then he ended up Rangers, Middlesbrough, Everton. And any chance of him coming back during that period, do you think?
No, I really don't. Beardsley was the one to come back, as you know. Waddle didn't look to come back. Gaza, for a long while, you know, bless him, after Lazio was on a slippery slope. The drinks and the demons were beginning to take effect. It was known on the grapevine that they were beginning to take effect. The same has happened to George Best, and so it wasn't the time to bring him back. But the wonderful thing is, you know, if you saw Gaza at his best, that's the memories, and that's what you should keep in your mind and in your heart, because he was quite exceptional. Forget what's happened to Gaza now. Like you said about Maradona. Remember Maradona, the great player that captivated people with Argentina and with Napoli and with Barcelona. Don't think of the guy since. Don't think of Gaza since. Keep in your eyes the fact that we were privileged to see somebody of that quality, and extra privileged that we could call him our own.
Beardsley then in the middle. I assume you've put Beardsley in the 90s, is that?
Yeah, I got round them by Waddle is the 80s, Gaza's the 80s, so they're my two. Mitchell's the 50s. I got Beardsley for the 90s.
Now,
his second time when he come back, of course.
It seemed that with age he just got better. I mean, the ball just stuck to his feet. He came back, obviously. There's a story that Keegan told, a bit of a fib about the age of him to Sir John Hall.
Yep.
But he just seemed to get better with age, and as it went on, the things he would do with the ball were just amazing. Was he better, do you think, in that second spell than the first, or are they not really that comparable?
No, he was as good, but he wasn't better. You can't get better than what Peter Beardsley was originally. There's no such thing as better. I think that he was possibly the most talented, the most gifted, the most all-round player, taker and maker of goals that Newcastle United have ever had, and that's saying something.
I say he's the best player I've seen.
Without a shadow of a doubt. And I saw a few before you, because you're just a young whippersnapper. And he was better than them too. He was absolutely wonderful. James Milner's him today, only in terms... James Milner couldn't lace his boots for ability, But in terms of looking after himself, in terms of being dedicated, in terms of living the right way, that's what Peter did. That's what Gazza didn't do. And that's why Peter lasted. And when he come back the second time, was as wonderful as he had been the first time. You remember, he had his championship winning time with Liverpool in between that. A wonderful, wonderful kid. Can't believe that he was 18 and working as a labourer, unable to get a club of any sort until he got Carlisle through Beaumont.
You mentioned, though, I mean, obviously the age. He was what? Was he 31, 32, 33? So that time he rejoined Newcastle, being that old and being expected to be the best player on the side wasn't really something that was the thing back then. Now it's the given. You can be 34, 35 and still turning it on with relative ease. Were you shocked at just how good he was when he came back under Keegan?
No. I was shocked at how good he was when I first saw him because he was just so much better than anything else. I mean, I remember I was the sole judge. How can you have a judging panel with only one judge? But that was me. They had the North East Newcomer of the Year in sport, and it wasn't confined to football. There was a jockey in it. There was a ice skater that was winning medals in it. There was Rob Hindmarsh from Sunderland, and there was Beardsley, and I think Jack Johnson presented the trophy. North East Most Promising Newcomer, it was called, and I voted for Beardsley, and Beardsley got it. And at that stage, he was playing for Carlisle. And I did an interview with him for the Chronicle, of course, and I said, one day, would you love to play for Newcastle United? He was a Geordie, for goodness sake, from Long Benton, etc., etc. And he says, yeah, it would be absolutely wonderful, etc., etc. Never thought about it, straight pattern pad quotes. What would you expect a kid to say? That he wants to play for his local town? Of course. Next thing I know, Sunday morning, Gibbo's trying to have a lie-in in Wickham, and there's a knock on the door. And I open the door, and this fella standing in a cloth cap with steam coming out his ears, and it's Bob Stoker, who didn't know where I lived initially. He knew who I was and how to get me on the phone, but he didn't know where I lived, but he'd found out. And on a Sunday morning, he's knocking on my front door, accusing me of tapping his best player to sign for Newcastle United. I said to him, well, do you want to come in, Bob, and we'll talk about it? And would you like a chucky egg and some soldiers? And the humour went straight over his head about the chucky egg, of course. He wasn't in a laughing mood. And that's how volatile he was. He loved Newcastle. He played for Newcastle in the FA Cup final. He knows what Newcastle I mean. I said, look, the kid's going to have ambition. He's that good. Do you think he's going to stay with Carlisle United for the rest of his life? Because if you do, I've got news for you. Carlisle aren't big enough for that. Do you think Carlisle are going to grow as much as Peter Beardsley is going to grow? And Peter Beardsley outgrew Newcastle because of their lack of ambition and went on to Liverpool. But Bob was fine about it from then on. But and Beardsley formed this wonderful relationship with Keegan when they were played together, which is why Keegan went and brought him back when Keegan was manager, because they played together. And I mean, Peter Beardsley used to say that KK, who was a self-made player. He wasn't the natural player that Beardsley was. Beardsley was gifted. God had touched him on the shoulder. With Kevin Keegan, he worked hard. He made himself a footballer, the same as Frank Clark did. He made himself a footballer. But was seen as the ultimate pro, and therefore latched onto this young kid and took him under his wing when they were playing together, Beardsley. And he said, we went and played Man City, and you thought this wonderful pro would be a great pro. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, KK. And he said, we're going into Main Road to play Man City, and a Newcastle fan gives KK a big box of toffees. Just loved him, and yeah, okay. And he said, he took me, got changed next to me in the dressing room. He said, and I'm watching him get changed. I'm saying, what's he doing? And he ate the whole box of toffees before the kick-off, picked up the ball and ran out as captain with Beardsley behind him. And Beardsley said, I can't believe this. And he said to him after, he said, gives us energy, son, gives us energy. But they went together, both as teammates and as manager and player. But Beardsley was the real deal, ahead of Keegan in terms of God-given ability.
Any names that nearly made it into the middle? Obviously, we've got your substitutes bench.
Yes.
One name does appear on there, Johan Gibbo. We'll speak about the bench at the end of the first 11. But any other names? I mean, people might mention Rob Lee, Gary Speed. I know it all depends on the decades and the choices you've got.
Yeah, that was the problem. But you would go for all those people. I mean, we've been very blessed. You would go for Tony Green, who only played 20 odd games for Newcastle, but you would look at him for the centre of midfield. The entertainers had so many good players that could play in there. Rob Lee would deserve a place, or if he got a place in any side, nobody could object. If Gary Speed got a place in any side, nobody could object. As you'd said, if Solano got one of the wide places, nobody. We have been blessed over the years, but you've got to go with who you see as quality. And if there's not many better players that played for England than Gascoigne and Beardsley. Never mind played for Newcastle United. So it's very difficult for me to look beyond those two.
On to the front two then. I don't think there'll be any surprise when you give out the names. I'll let you announce your forward line.
No. My first guy come from the noughties, the 2000s, which is Mr. Alan Shearer, and War Jackie from the 50s. Now, straight away, before somebody says anything, and especially my old mate Malcolm MacDonald, is, I'm sorry, I've got to deal in facts here, and if you look in the record books, the greatest 2 goal scorers in the history of Newcastle United is 1 Alan Shearer and 2 War Jackie. I've got Super Mac on the subs bench. I thought of going with 3 forwards and playing Super Mac with Shearer and allowing Milburn to play wide, because at Newcastle United, before he become the legendary number 9, he did play it outside right for Newcastle. So you could fiddle the team that way. But then I'm going to have to leave out one of the other guys. And I don't think you can look beyond what Shearer and Milburn have done for Newcastle United. Their record is just untouchable. The only sadness I've got is that at least War Jackie won the FA Cup 3 times in 5 years and had those 3 medals to show what he was worth, and Alan Shearer didn't have 1 medal with Newcastle United.
Now, obviously, sadly, Milburn passed away, I think it was 1988-89. So he never obviously got to see Alan Shearer, even at Southampton, let alone do what he did at Blackburn and Newcastle.
No.
Did Milburn ever think that his record would be broken?
I think he always hoped, because he always put Newcastle United before himself, you know. He's the most unselfish. And you talk about David Craig being embarrassed about or even confused about what he... This was War Jackie, the greatest legend there has ever been until Shearer come along. And he was completely modest as a guy. And I think he looked for somebody to do that. He always said that he was helped, when he was a player starting out at Newcastle, he was helped by Hughie Gallagher, who used to stand outside St James's Park waiting for Jackie to come, pull him to one side. You know, you're the greatest, son. You just keep doing. But, you know, you play with, just turn that shoulder a little bit when you're receiving the ball, etc., etc. He said, and I always remembered that. And when he become, after he'd been a superstar, he used to stand outside the same entrance waiting for Super Mac to come and do... Mind, you didn't have to tell Super Mac what a good player he was, because he knew what a good player he was. He was John Wayne. But he gave him so much advice, so much encouragement, took him round to look for houses when he come up as a 21-year-old from Luton, and was already married with a family, helped him to get his house, etc., etc. I mean, I wrote a lot of books with Jackie. One of the most they'd always say, don't meet your hero when you've been a kid, because you see them through rose-tinted glasses, and what you get is the reality, warts and all. There was no warts with Jackie. I met Jackie and he was just absolutely terrific. The shock, we knew he had cancer when he died. He was a big smoker in his time. He'd given up smoking, I think, but he'd been a big smoker, smoked in the dressing room in the 3 cup finals at half-time. And he was going to die of cancer. He had cancer. He was battling cancer. Now went away on holiday, and I was sitting having a coffee one morning in a restaurant, and the guy in the booth in front of me had an English paper, and I saw the paper open, looked over his shoulder, and it said, "Whoa, Jackie dies." And I was absolutely decimated. And I was unable to get home for the funeral, missed the funeral, which absolutely knocked my end in. But his wife, his good lady, invited me up to speak at a memorial service, special memorial service, national, on his behalf when I returned, because I'd worked with her on his famous "This Is Your Life" program, which we needn't go into, I've talked about before, which happened up here. And, you know, he talked, you look, he's remembered as almost a goody two-shoes because he was a wonderful, wonderful man as well as a wonderful player. But he had that streak. He told me when I was writing the books with him, he said, "Gibbo, way back just after the Second World War, he became a fitter in Hazelrig Colliery. He playing for Newcastle, but he was a fitter in Hazelrig Colliery. Newcastle signed Len Shackleton from Bradford for 13,000, big money in those days. And Shack was immediately put into the pits to work as Jackie's labourer in the pits. So Hazelrig Colliery had Jackie Milburn and Len Shackleton, two of the great, great players of their era, working at the pits for them. And Jackie said, "I had a motorbike in those days, which were banned at St James's Park because it was seen as far too dangerous. But he used to get on the motorbike and Shaq got on the back, and they used to travel down from the pit every Tuesday and Thursday for training at St James's Park on the motorbike. He used to stash it round the back of the ground, a bit like Gaza in his car in Rome, and go round and go training. You're not going to get better than Shearer and Milburn, and that's saying something when you've got Supermac competing for that position, and that's why he had to become my sub ahead of Hughie Gallagher. Hasn't come into this because he played in the 20s, and there's nobody living, I think, that's saw Hughie play. His record was phenomenal, and he would have had to come into things. There was Wyn Davies, there was Len White, as well as these. But for me, once you've gone Shearer and Milburn, you've got to go Supermac as your backup, because what would Shearer, Milburn or Supermac be worth to Newcastle United today?
Scary.
We're talking today about whether a player can get in the number 9 shirt, can get into double figures for the season. These fellas scored between 20 and 30 goals season after season after season.
How alike were they in terms of style on the pitch?
Those Supermac and Milburn were very alike in terms of blisteringly quick. I mean, excessively quick for their era. Nobody was faster than those two. So they were alike in that way. Shearer didn't have pace, particularly. He wasn't slow, but he didn't have pace. But his all-round play, he was a British Bulldog, the last of the British Bulldog centre-forwards. And I think as an all-rounder, because Milburn wasn't great in the air, he would tell you he always had fibrosis, and that was why he didn't jump well. He wasn't good in the air. Supermac was good in the air. Shearer was sensational in the air. I think Shearer, all-round number 9 play was best. But Supermac and Milburn were so quick that they absolutely terrified people.
Now, obviously, Shearer had that falling out with Ruud Gullit. You know, his face told the picture. He didn't hide from it. You know, he doesn't hide from when he's angry, even today when it comes to Newcastle. Milburn wasn't in that starting 11 for the FA Cup final. Obviously, we all know the story. The team sheet was scrumpled up. Milburn was put into the side, and then obviously scores. Fantastic goal. What did he make of that? Because that's a big, you know, 2 fingers up to the original selection.
Absolutely. The staggering thing is, Andrew, when you look at the quality of Shearer, Milburn and Supermac, you would think that any manager would be so grateful to have them in your side that you'd mollycoddle them and be accused, if you like, of showing preferential treatment to them rather than other players. Yet Shearer fell out with Ruud Gullit, Milburn fell out with Doug Livingstone, and Supermac fell out with Gordon Lee. all at Newcastle, and you just cannot believe that, can you? I mean, Dougal Livingston come into Newcastle and wanted to totally change the team. He coached abroad, I think it was Sweden or whatever. And Jackie Milburn told me this story. Jackie was never part of his clique, and he had a clique in the same way as Gordon Lee had a clique, and Supermark was never part of it. But Milburn said, the day I saw him pull Bobby Mitchell in training, who's the greatest delivery of the ball that Milburn had ever seen, and that included Stanley Matthews, and tell him to put his left boot out and put a chalk mark on Mitchell's left boot and said, that's where I want to see you strike the ball, etc., etc. Telling Mitchell, who had already won 2 cups in 51, 52 for Newcastle, that this is what he wanted him to do. He said, Milburn said, when the minute I saw that, I thought, oh dear, oh dear. And of course, Stan Seymour, who had managed Newcastle, signed Milburn from the pits and signed everybody that was in that cup side. For some reason, wasn't manager for 55 and had give it up to Livingston, got this team sheet. He just went in the bin, put Milburn back in, changed the team, 42 seconds, Milburn scores a header, which is not what he could do, fastest goal at Wembley for years, fastest goal at the time, and it stood for years, vindicated everything, and shortly after that, Douglas Livingston was sacked, of course.
Would he have kicked off, do you think, if Seymour hadn't have changed its side, or would he just put Newcastle first and said, right, it's all about the club winning this cup, and then the fallout would come?
Oh, I mean, it would have kicked off with the players before the final, because the players were very, very strong team together. They'd won the cup twice already in the 50s. They were up for it for a third time in 5 years. They had seen the team, the basis of the team was all round Milburn and Mitchell. Harvey, who had skipped the side in the first 2 cup finals, was first team coach for this one, and he kept the peace between the senior pros like Mitchell and Milburn, who fell out greatly with the manager, and the overall situation. He was the peacemaker. But when that team was announced, I think Joe Harvey just said, let Stan Seymour say that. Let Stan Seymour say it would be taken care of. All he did was, as we say, Wood Hullett, when he sent his team sheet out to play Sunderland and Alan Shearer was on the bench, I called it the biggest suicide note I'd ever seen written. And I think the same applied to Douglas Livingston when he wrote out and presented on the Thursday his cup final team to play Man City. That was a suicide note. The amazing thing is, it wasn't with Gordon Lee. He was allowed to sell Hibbert and was allowed to sell Supermac. But then, instead of saying and seeing the job through, which is what he should have done, having got rid of 2 huge stars like that, he took to his toes himself, which was unforgivable.
Shearer, obviously, record goal scorer, 206 goals. I mean, he very nearly retired and didn't get that. Obviously, he had to be persuaded to stay on by Graham Souness, like Kenny Dalglish. Probably one of the few things, we can thank Souness for. Obviously, and a good goal in the end against Portsmouth, knocked on through by Amiobi in a nice little sliding shot past the keeper. Brilliant scenes, the reaction. What goal for you, if I was going to ask, which I am going to ask you, of Shearer's stands out? Which is the one that you say that is his best?
Well, I mean, there's ones that stood out for the occasion.
Yeah.
Like the 2 semi-final victories in 98 and 99 when he got the winning goal. For the occasion, it's got you to Wembley.
But I mean, that's that one against Spurs is still an absolute cracker of an effort, isn't it?
No question. But when you add in the occasion and seeing them standing with their hands up in the air with the crowd, for the occasion, they were sensational. But it's got to be Everton at the Gallagher end. For me, the volley when he caught it on the flush on, right in the top corner. I mean, that was sheer quality. Now, good goal scorers don't do flamboyant goals. Good players do flamboyant goals when they only score occasionally. Good finishers, like Shearer, like Jimmy Greaves, often they're close in. They can be in the 6-yard box, certainly 12 yards, finish. Like going in a back lane full of flick knives. They go in. You notice Joe Linton doesn't do that too much. You know, the real goal scorers, Jimmy Greaves, Alan Shearer, Gary Lineker, they go there. But this one against Everton was just everything about it was sweet.
I'm going to disagree with you. My favourite one is Chelsea. Backs into Desai. He must be 30, 40 yards out. Backs in, he's strong. Turns, shot into the top corner.
Well, is there only 4 goals that Alan Shearer scored that we could talk about?
No,
what I mean by that is that he scored so many that everybody's going to have a different favourite to everyone else.
That's the beauty of it.
It is the beauty of it. But he wasn't, and this is the ultimate compliment from me, is meant as the ultimate compliment. He wasn't the scorer of sensational goals. He was the scorer of regular goals. He was a scorer of important goals. And that is what the team's about. You can get somebody that will sashay past 3, 4, 5 defenders and stick it in the back of the net, but he mightn't score again for another 14 months. This fella just scored and scored and scored until it almost got boring, but it never got boring for Geordie.
Who takes the penalties on that side?
Great question. Shearer, without a shadow of a doubt. Milburn could take penalties. Mitchell could take penalties.
Beardsley took a few. Beardsley took a few, didn't he?
Beardsley
before Shearer signed.
Would take a couple, but hey, if you want the ball in the back of the net, just go to Shearer.
Who leads it? Who's captain?
Moncur. Shearer could be. But if he's going to be the centre forward, going to score the goals and takes the penalties, don't get greedy. Moncur's captain the side. You just run out and do the business at the sharp end.
Now on to the substitutes bench, because obviously every team has a bad day every now and then. You've picked 3.
Or injuries.
You've picked 3. Yep. Again, largely probably based on the decades and the constraints of them rules. But your 3, as we've mentioned, are Malcolm MacDonald, Johan Cabaye, and Demba Ba. So let's start with Demba Ba.
Obviously, the reason for that is because of the eras, of course. Yeah. Supermac, I was surprised that in the 70s, I ended up only Moncur in the 70s. So I was able to bring in Supermac and wasn't I pleased about that. I had to do 2010s because that's one of the eras. And quite frankly, they are number 12 and number 13. But 2 players had to come from there, and I thought they were the best 2 players. I've always loved forwards because I'm a romantic about football. I think football's a game of entertainment. It is meant to entertain us. It's meant to give us joy. I never got entertained seeing a 0-0 draw and come away being thankful. I like to see goals and them be for my side. So there's 2 centre forwards of the 3 subs. And Cabaye was a forward type player. Ba was interesting. I mean, I think he was better than Cisse. I think he was a better all-round player than Cisse. Cisse was a finisher who, when he first come, was so sensational in not only the goals he scored, but the type of goals, like at Chelsea. We thought, what have we got on our hands here? His form levelled out a little bit after that. And to me, he was just a finisher. Jimmy Greaves was just a finisher. What a wonderful thing to be, just a finisher. But Ba had a greater all-round game than Cisse, and it's all a matter of opinion. And really, my memories of both him and Cabaye can be summed up almost in one game, which was a very special game for me, personally. And it involved both of them very heavily. It took place on January the 4th, 2012, and while the date is so important, as far as I'm concerned, is that happens to be my birthday, January the 4th. So, first of all, I'm at St James's Park because it's my birthday. We're playing Manchester United, and this isn't Manchester United of today. This is Manchester United. This is Ferguson, this is Rooney, this is Giggs, this is Rio Ferdinand, this is Carrick. This is the proper Manchester United. We are playing them at home on my birthday, so that's great. Instead of being in the press box, some guys wanted to give us a little bit of a special night out because it was a birthday, so I was in one of the private boxes.
Just to be polite, of course.
And I thought I would turn up because it's impolite to turn it down, of course. So I had a little glass of white wine, sitting in his private box. First half, we're 1-0 up. Lovely. Gets to half time. Door bursts open. And who should walk in? The first thing I see is this huge birthday cake with 7 candles on it, all lit, which was a bit, ooh, what's this? And then it dawns on me, the face behind it, it's Alan Shearer. Alan Shearer is bringing me a birthday cake at half time into the box, singing happy birthday to you. Now, when he sang that, I thought, it's just as well you're such a good centre forward because you're a bloody awful singer. But you can imagine for me, one of my great heroes, one of my great friends, to bring you a cake in on your 70th birthday. You're playing Manchester United. I had a little bit joke, we're 1-0 up. Perhaps this has come up at the right time because it'll be all downhill from now on. We win 3-0. We win 3-0. Now, if you can ask for a better birthday than that, I had my cake, ate it, and saw Newcastle win 3-0. And the wonderful thing about that was that on the first goal, because we're coming back to Cabaye and Barr, on the first goal, Krul kicks the ball long, Shola goes up with Phil Jones, the centre-half, who was an England player. Shola played terrific with Barr up front, and Cabaye played terrific in the middle of the park. Shola goes up, flicks the ball on with his head. Barr, 12 yards out, catches it on his right foot. Stunning shot, ripped the top of the net off. Barr scored. We're winning 1-0. Within 2 minutes of me putting the cake down and thinking I'll have the rest of that at the full-time whistle, and going back, within 2 minutes to start the second half, Barr's chopped down by Jones. 30 yards out. Free kick, okay, that's the end of that. Cabaye stands over it and rifles it into the net. So, Barr's got the first goal. Barr's got the free kick for the second. Cabaye scored it. And then on 90 minutes, Jones, who by now doesn't know whether he's coming left, right, centre or disappearing up his own backside, puts in his own net, and it's 3-0. A wonderful, wonderful, wonderful day. Shearer, birthday cake, Man United, 3-0, Barr, Cabaye, 2 stars. They're in my team, even if it's just for the birthday. Cabaye, wonderful, wonderful player, will be remembered, apart from my personal memory, for scoring the goal of Manchester United when we won, which was the first time in yonks we won a Man U. Actually, the first time since Newcastle, with Supermax centre forward, won at Manchester United against Lower Best and Charlton 1 week after getting knocked out the cup by a non-league side, everything. That's the only other time we won at Manchester United. Cabaye scored the goal. Most people nationally remember Barr for scoring the goal that stopped, or was supposed to stop, Liverpool winning the title when Gerrard slipped and Barr went through and put in. Barr scored again this year, didn't he, against
Manchester United,
Good player.
Definitely.
Good player, underrated by some people. Certainly the best 2 players for me for 2010, I would go with Cabaye and Barr. There's a case for Colaccini, etc., but I like attackers. I'll go for them too.
54 appearances, 29 goals. So that has a decent record
Not bad,
for Barr. And obviously we all know about Supermark 121 goals. I look forward to you telling them, though, that he's not made your starting 11. That should be an interesting conversation.
Well, yes, I think he might be slightly disappointed. But when I tell him that because he always had this wonderful expression whenever he was criticised at Newcastle, and he was under Gordon Lee, for not tracking back, and he would say, I don't track back, I stay on the halfway line, and when the ball's cleared, I go and score in the right goal. I don't track back and I'm defensive. He used to always say, when anybody challenged him, put your goals on the table. So when he says to me, you didn't pick me in the side, I said, well, you know about putting the goals on the table? Well, Shearer and Milburn have just put their goals on the table, and that's why they're selected. But you can be first sub.
Some might say Hatton Ben Arthur would sneak in before Cabaye, or...
No, on ability, a great ability, but...
On what he did.
I'm furious about him. He wasted his talent. He should have been one of the great players, and he'll retire and he'll remember that, He'll retire and he'll say, I should have been better than I was. He scored twice one of those goals I was talking about where you run from the halfway line, beat 6 men, stick it in the top corner. But he hadn't the goal scoring record of Shearer.
Definitely not.
Well, he didn't do that. That's what I meant. Shiva didn't do that. He just scored and scored and scored and scored.
Any players from today's squad that were on the outskirts?
Behave yourself. I want you to behave yourself. The goalkeepers, Dubovnik and Darlow, have done well. They will be lucky to lace Shea Given's boots at the end of their stay with Newcastle United. Sam Maximum, on a great day, can look a good player. I'll tell you what he isn't. Consistent. And I tell you what Mitchell and Waddle were, consistent. And the rest of them, they wouldn't have got a Newcastle reserve side.
There we have it. Before we get John to go through his team and the decades, we haven't picked the manager, and what I thought I'd do is this episode will go out, we'll let you guys listen to it, and then what we'll do, we'll open it up to you guys to pick the manager from the decade, so 50s all the way up to present day. I don't think Steve Bruce will win that vote. However, he will be on it. And then, we'll announce the winner. And John,
I look forward to hearing that.
Yeah.
It would be super to hear who the fans would like to manage that side.
I imagine there's probably three names.
There's three, which I'm not going to mention now, but there's three that I would consider.
Yeah.
And there's only three I would consider.
And I guess you guys listening will be able to guess just who that is. But we'll put every name out. That includes the likes of Allardyce and Glenn Roeder, just in case.
You're not going to put Joe Kinnear and Steve McLaren, are you?
They will be on the list, yes. I don't imagine they'll get 1%.
If it's to find a manager for Gibbo's side, I wouldn't let them in the front room. Never mind manage my side.
But that's the beauty of a democracy, John.
It is. But they ain't going to get the votes, baby. You wait and see.
Let's go through the starting 11 then. We'll start with Shea Given.
Yep. Shea Given in goal from the 2000s stands supreme, head and shoulders above anyone else. Back four, Craig, Philip Albert, Moncur and Clark. Three of them played regularly in the same side. Craig, Moncur and Clark. Newcastle had a wonderful defence in those days. Philip Albert, you could watch him play all day. He could have played anywhere in any side. If you can beat a better midfield three than Waddle, Gascoigne and Beardsley, all of whom were super England internationals, all of whom are Geordies, and all of whom were sold by Newcastle United, typical of our club. And then Mitchell, the outside left, if you're a young lad, ask your dad. After you ask your dad about Mitchell, you won't need me to explain. Forwards, quite simple. The greatest two forwards Newcastle United have ever had, the greatest goal scorers in Newcastle United's history, the icing on the cake, the blue-eyed boys. These are the guys that matter. These are the guys that entertain. These are the guys that send you home happy to have a pint. Shearer and Milburn, nobody did it any better.
And there we have it. What a team as well. And made up of plenty of Geordies as well, which is a added frustration to what we see today because there's not enough of that happening, not enough of them coming through. John, they were a pleasure to sit down and go through your team with you. Any feedback from you guys listening or watching, do drop me a message. I always do pass them on to John, and he's more than happy to see the nice comments we get.
Yep, absolutely. And let me know who the manager is because I'm very interested in that.
We certainly will do. And also, if you have any ideas for the next episode of Gibbo's Corner, please do let us know. We'll do a Christmas special, which will go out on Christmas Day. We'll record that next month. But we always like your suggestions and ideas. In the meantime, keep safe. Thanks for tuning in. And thanks, for listening.
Thanks a lot, guys.